Advice to the serious student. What advice do you give to a person who desires to apply himself to a serious study of the ancient wisdom teachings? The desire for wisdom is in itself the most commendable of human emotions, but in too many cases this desire comes to naught through ignorance and misunderstanding. We must not only earnestly and unselfishly desire truth, but we must create within our own natures an ethical environment suitable for the reception of spiritual knowledge. If a building is to stand, it must be raised upon an adequate foundation, and if human character is to withstand the shocks of circumstance, it must also be built upon a firm and true foundation. No man can know more than he himself is. That with which we understand is the measure of our understanding. Before it is possible for an individual to perceive clearly the mysteries of the inner life, he must develop the faculties for this perception. From the most ancient times, the priests of the mystery temples were the custodians of the disciplines of philosophy. These disciplines were revealed only to disciples who had proved themselves worthy of such instruction. There is much more to the study of philosophy than merely listening, reading, and accepting. The first step in the study of the ancient wisdom teachings is not the quest of knowledge, but the preparation of self to receive knowledge. This is where most truth-seekers make their first mistake. With their eyes turned toward the heavens, they rush ecstatically towards illumination, only to stumble, like Thales, into the ditch of their own unpreparedness. We know thousands of people who want to be wise, but very few of these people seem capable of understanding that before wisdom must come the capacity for wisdom. Illumination is possible only in an organism that has fitted itself for illumination, nor does one so fit himself by hoping, wishing, or listening. As an athlete must train himself in order to excel in bodily prowess, so the student of philosophy must put his thoughts, emotions, and actions under specialized discipline if he is to develop philosophical strength. Between the modern truth-seeker and the goal to which he aspires are numerous pitfalls and dilemmas. False prophets lead astray the unwary, conflicting doctrines perplex the uninformed, and a host of doubts and uncertainties weaken the resolution. Hundreds of students afflicted with these numerous problems have asked me to straighten out for them the tangled course of learning. The usual complaint of the confused goes somewhat like this: how am I going to know if this teacher is telling the truth? How can I determine which sect to join? How can I be sure that this book is reliable? Among 1,000 claims, pretensions, boasts, and persuasions, how am I to perceive clearly the straight and certain way that leads to light? It is very difficult to reason with people suffering from religious glamour. For example, you may spend hours explaining to such a person that a certain Swami's breathing exercises will lead to nervous derangements and mental unbalance rather than illumination, only to find him a few weeks later studying the same exercises from another Swami. It is impossible to save anyone from his own foolishness. If by some miracle you can pick him out of a present evil, he only falls into the next snare that is encountered. Most modern metaphysicians suffer from an incurable attack of falling sickness. They waste their time and their means on pseudo-prophets and false gods. They prefer insipid platitudes to hard work. Now, at first thought, it may seem that the real cause of trouble is the false prophet, but upon mature reflection, it is evident that false prophets can thrive only upon the stupidity and gullibility of thoughtless mortals, weak in the faculty of common sense. This leads to the major conclusion. A person incapable of discriminating between a true and false doctrine is unfit for any form of esoteric instruction. This sweeping statement may offend a class of people who feel that their souls are much more highly evolved than their intelligence, but the truth remains that a man incapable of unmasking a fake Mahatma is scarcely in a position to unveil the mysteries of the cosmos. If a student were to ask how to protect himself against the insidious effect of corrupt doctrines, I should say, if you are thoroughly, devotedly, and unswervingly dedicated to the acceptance of the immutability of the law of karma, you are above the contaminating influence of 99% of fraudulent metaphysicians. If you believe in karma, you know that you can never avoid the results of action or enjoy unmerited advantages. The universe, gods, and men bow before the inevitable edict of karma. There are no vicarious atonements or exceptions in creation. Law is final, absolute, and immutable. The disciple who takes his stand upon this fact will never wander far from the truth, but he who departs even for an instant from this certainty plunges into a sea of troubles. The doctrine of karma is sufficiently simple and familiar that even the average layman is capable of appreciating its integrity. Nearly all students of metaphysics pretend to accept the statement of karma as we find it in the Bible. As ye sow, so shall ye reap. Yet in practice, there are literally hundreds of metaphysical movements which seek in one way or another to undermine the teaching of this law by doctrines of special dispensation. To compromise truth is to deny God, and philosophy has no place in it for any cult that seeks to compromise with the law of cause and effect. A pertinent example of what we mean by compromising the teaching of the law of karma will illustrate this general thought. A metaphysical teacher claiming to speak in the name of a great adept recently stated that the long periods of probation and preparation prior to esoteric instruction demanded in the old mystery schools were no longer necessary for students of the spiritual sciences. By a new dispensation, this adept would open the doors of the inner mysteries at the present time to all earnest souls. Thousands of sincere people, forgetful of the law of karma, have been intrigued by this program. Their faculties of discrimination are numbed by the name of the illustrious adept used to further the ideas of this teacher. An informed student can have only one attitude on this matter. No adept of the Great White Lodge could possibly promulgate a doctrine inconsistent with the law of karma, and no man, adept, or even God can in any way modify the working of that law. Adepts do not make the laws of nature, they serve them. The probationary rules and rites of the old mysteries are as much an inevitable part of man's spiritual education as infancy and childhood are a part of his physical development. As well say that a human being can reach maturity without childhood and adolescence as that a human being can reach initiation without probationship and discipleship. If I were personally convinced, which I certainly am not, that the adept referred to had actually made the statements attributed to him, I would still not believe them. Rather, I would derive the authority for my attitude from the words of Gautama Buddha, who stated on one occasion, "I will not accept the doctrine because the learned have so stated it, nor will I accept it because the gods themselves have so spoken. I will accept it only because it is true." Euclid, the Megarian, was once asked by Ptolemy, king of Egypt, if there was a short way to master geometry. The philosopher instantly replied, "Sire, there is no royal road to learning." The words of Euclid applied perfectly to the mysteries of philosophy. There is no royal road to truth. There is no shortcut to God. There is no patent formula for the achievement of wisdom. All things grow and unfold. Truth and wisdom in man must likewise develop according to the laws of their own natures. True students of the great doctrines that bring about the emancipation of the human soul are not interested in royal roads. A man seeking wisdom seeks the most valuable thing in the world. He desires a treasure not easily to be gained, but in value above all other treasures of the earth. He knows that those who live the life shall know the doctrine. Dedicated to self-improvement and the establishment of his own life upon the immutable foundations of integrity, he is unmoved and uninfluenced by vain promises and empty words. It must always be remembered that while philosophy has in it many superphysical doctrines, it has never included any supernatural speculations. There are no miracles in nature. There are effects the causes of which are unknown to us, yet each of these effects is the outworking of a law in itself consistent with the effect which it produces. Any person who waits for a miracle to bring about his perfection, or expects to perfect himself by miraculous means, will be sadly disillusioned in the course of time. The admonition of old sages still holds true and will continue to do so until the end of time. Each man must work out his own salvation with diligence. Many novices in the study of the occult sciences come to the conclusion that they are making small advancement unless they practice development exercises to stimulate some aspect of cosmic consciousness within themselves. There are also many foolish enough to think that visions, voices, and other psychic phenomena are indications of unfolding spiritual powers. Let no earnest seeker be deceived by such fantasies. The achievement of wisdom is man's coming of age, and it is natural for that individual to be wise, who has set up the causes of wisdom in himself. To one who has not set up these causes, wisdom is not only unnatural, but impossible. The truth concerning spiritual exercises is that they are useless and even dangerous unless part of a carefully planned and intelligently directed program of self-improvement. To stimulate psychic centers in the body by breathing, concentration, meditation, etc., without first bringing the entire nature under the rule of reason, is to endanger life and health. No man is greater than the sum of his own parts, and breathing by some mystic formula cannot make a man greater than he is. Luther Burbank called man the human plant. Like some flower of the field, the human soul unfolds under the benefic influences of nature. Yet it is not the sun alone that nourishes the plant, nor the rain, nor the dark earth, nor the moon, nor the stars, nor the wind, but rather all of these together in proper measure and proportion. So in the human plant, it is not only the air man breathes that sustains him, nor the sidereal diffusion, nor his food, nor his thought, nor his emotion, nor his action, nor his aspiration, but rather all of these together in balanced combination. To make any real progress in this greatest of all sciences, a student of philosophy must improve in each and every one of his parts. It is not sufficient that he try to stimulate a few nerve plexuses and feel that in this manner he has become acceptable in the sight of the law. When Plato established his academy, he caused to be inscribed above the gate the words, "Let none ignorant of geometry enter here." Pythagoras would permit none to become a member of his community who had not achieved excellence in mathematics, astronomy, and music, in addition to the moral virtues. Each applicant for admission to the ancient mystery temples was expected to possess a high standard of character and ability. Celsus, in a passage preserved by Origen, declared that those who call man to the mysteries of the eternal God proclaim as follows, "Let him approach whose hands are pure and whose words are wise." And again, others proclaim, "Let him approach who is pure from all wickedness, whose soul is not conscious of any evil, and who leads a just and upright life." And these things are proclaimed by those who promise a purification from error. It is not my intention to seem pessimistic or to discourage sincere men and women seeking spiritual light, but it is only fair to the student himself that he should understand the requirements for admission into the ranks of the philosophic elect. The average metaphysician is hopelessly unqualified for the pursuit of knowledge. He is willing, hopeful, and as kindly as his disposition will permit, but in most cases he is so lacking in the fundamentals of character and ability that he could not have been accepted into any of the schools of mystical philosophy about which he reads so avidly. I have heard many say, "If I had only lived in the days of Pythagoras, if I could have only known Plato, if I could only have sat at the feet of Buddha." Yet if these same people had lived in those days, and possessed only their present qualifications, they could not have been admitted into the schools of any of these masters. Fortunately, the disease of ignorance is not incurable. Those who wish to be the disciples of the ancient teachings today can fit themselves for the philosophic life by following the same procedure which 2,400 years ago prepared disciples for initiation into the Pythagorean rites. Let us now consider those offerings which each neophyte must bring to the gates of the everlasting house. There are 14 requisites, 7 of the inner life, which are termed character, and 7 of the outer life, which are termed attainments. The 7 inner requisites arise from self-discipline, and the 7 outer requisites from the direction of ability to the mastery of arts and sciences. A person who has achieved to a reasonable proficiency in the 14 requisites may be described as capable of becoming aware of the esoteric keys to the secrets of life. Let those who do not possess the 14 requisites first achieve to these, before they demand admission to the house of light. We shall consider the 7 requisites of character. 1. Integrity. In philosophy, the word integrity signifies much more than the ordinary word honesty. Honesty may be only acceptance of certain standards of right and wrong and obedience thereto, but integrity is honesty illumined by inward realization. Integrity is the irresistible inward impulse to do that which is wise, noble, and beautiful. It lifts the life above blind obedience to man-made law, and establishes every thought and action upon the foundation of abiding justice. Integrity also implies perfect consistency between inward impulse and outward action. The outward life is dominated by inner conviction, and there is no interval of difference between the beauty in the soul and the nobility in the outward deed. Integrity is the living of truth, or, possibly, for the novice, the living of that which is the nearest to truth that he knows. A man who believes in fine spiritual principles and then lives a code of action inconsistent with these principles lacks integrity, even though he may be honest in his weights and measures. All too many truth-seekers claim noble standards, but live petty and intolerant codes. Such a person might study mysticism for 100 lives, but not having learned to live a gentle and noble life, his theorizing and meditating are in vain. The old sages became embodiments of the beliefs and traditions which they served. No one can have really beautiful thoughts in his soul without having his life beautified thereby. For all outward living is molded over inward impulse. Integrity is the rationalizing of the inner life, so that everything that emerges from it is just, enlightened, and true. 2. Discrimination. Out of integrity arises discrimination, for the life that is founded in truth is lived in harmony with truth. The virtue of discrimination lies in the power it bestows to determine the comparative dignity of values. The end of discrimination is to invariably discover right and choose it from among conflicting and confusing opinions. Discrimination to a certain degree is judgment, to another degree it is clear vision, and to a considerable measure it is courage. Discrimination leads to conviction and bestows the courage of conviction. He who possesses discrimination can never be victimized by the illusionary values of this mortal sphere. All the old philosophers declared discrimination to be invaluable to the pursuit of wisdom. A person incapable of discriminating between the various doctrines that have been promulgated in different centuries and civilizations can never hope to discover truth. Philosophy is a service to truth, and no man can serve well that which he cannot discover surely. Discrimination destroys false gods. It releases the soul from bondage to opinions. It emancipates man from 1,000 errors. To use a poetic phrase, discrimination picks unerringly the polar star from a galaxy of constellations. In modern metaphysics, thousands of students drift from cult to cult upon a tide of moods and emotions. We cannot truly progress until we chart the course of our purposes. Discrimination removes the uncertainties from action. We drift no longer, but, steering a sure course, come at last to the safe haven we have sought. 3. Application is the capacity for intelligent persistence. It implies both continuity and continuousness. It also conveys the thought of one-pointedness and thoroughness in effort. In Western civilization, the tenor of life is subject to constant interruption. The average individual is torn between many purposes. He attempts to scatter his faculties and his vital resources over much too large an area of activity, and in his attempt to do everything, he does nothing well. By developing the power of application, the mind is secured from the hazards of distraction and interruption. Without application, there can be no organized intensity of effort, and without organized intensity, there can be no great accomplishment in philosophy. Application, however, does not mean that a student should think of nothing but his philosophy 24 hours a day, 365 days a year, nor that his whole time should be spent devoted to study, reading, or contemplation of abstract truths. A life unreasonably immersed in learning is apt to be fruitless and unbalanced. Learning, to be of the greatest value, must be tested by application. The philosopher not only devotes hours to the absorption of knowledge, he must also spend years in the application of knowledge to its reasonable ends. A healthy, normal existence requires a fine balance between effort and relaxation. Application is concerned not with the duration of effort primarily, but rather with the whole soulness of effort. In music, for example, certain hours must be given to practice, and failure to observe this routine is fatal to technique. On the other hand, it is perfectly possible for the musician to over-practice, and through this excess destroy the individuality and soul quality of his performance. Application involves a fine discrimination, skill to judge the routine necessary to build a solid foundation, encouraged to interrupt this routine before it destroys the individual qualities of the mind. Remember that philosophy is an art as well as a science. While the processes of thinking are bounded by certain rules, these rules, if overemphasized, result in a bondage to process, and soul power is easily destroyed when inner impulse is wholly sacrificed to prescribed method. 4. Patience. Application naturally implies patience, and patience is indeed a power of the soul. Without patience, nothing that is real or worthwhile can be accomplished. Patience is resignation to the inevitable processes of law. It should not destroy enthusiasm, but should curb all extremes of emotion, bringing about a gentle acceptance of the facts of existence. Nearly all students of metaphysical subjects are lured away from reason by the impatience of mind and heart. The most fatal delusion of metaphysics is belief in shortcuts to perfection. Many erroneous doctrines are catering to the impatience of the human soul. No individual who is willing to allow only 1 or 5, 10, or 50 years for the perfecting of himself should ever take up the study of philosophy. The ancient wisdom teachings measure the progress of the individual not in terms of years, but in terms of lives. It has taken thousands of millions of years to bring man up through the numerous stages of evolution to his present state, and it will require millions of years more to lift him to those divine heights to which his heart aspires. There is something pathetically ridiculous about people who are able to believe that they can attain cosmic consciousness in a few short lessons. I have met many sincere but benighted souls who, after studying a smattering of the occult sciences for a few years, are waiting breathlessly for initiation, which they believe is right around the corner. As one expressed it, after a few months of study, I expect the veil between the visible and invisible worlds to drop at any moment. Patience is the test of character, courage, and understanding. It is not the desire of the wise to build hastily, but rather to build well. Psychic shysters will go out of business when neophytes in metaphysics understand the words of the Greek philosopher who said, "Make philosophy thy existence." The old sage did not say, "Thy life work, or thy trade, or thy profession, or thy effort for a certain number of years." He used the term, "thy existence," to imply that the life of wisdom goes on, from incarnation to incarnation, becoming a part of the very self, transcending all limitations of time and place. Students of the ancient wisdom will still be students a million years from now. For as all life is a process of achieving, never consummated by ultimate achievement, so philosophy is a process of ever learning, an experience to which there is no conceivable end. The impatient novice tries a new system of development when illumination fails to arrive after a few months of study, but the soul that is wise with patience, which has risen above these illusions, rejoices in the perception of some small improvement at the end of many years of patient living. 5. Moderation. All the great masters of wisdom have warned their disciples of the dangers of immoderate attitudes. To Buddha, the philosophic life was the middle path between all intemperances of impulse. To Aristotle, sufficient learning was the golden mean, an equilibrium overcoming every aspect of excess. Socrates expressed the thought in simple words: "In all things, not too much." Moderation, as a requisite of philosophic enlightenment, is a single word to cover a multitude of temperances. Moderation, first of all, arises from an economy of resources, for in terms of energy, every intemperance is an extravagance. Most human beings die of their intemperances, but not always from those familiar excesses which we associate with the word. Many people who eat moderately, drink not at all, and are apparently paragons of the virtues, die of intemperance. For example, intolerance is a form of intemperance. Jealousy, worry, anger, fear, all these are intemperances just as destructive and wasteful as the more familiar excesses of the flesh. Any unworthy, unbeautiful, or uncontrolled waste of life, thought, or feeling is an intemperance. To do a disagreeable or injurious deed produces fully as destructive an effect on the soul as alcoholism or the drug habit, and all immoderation is habit-forming. Each time we lose our temper, it is more difficult to control it. Every excess leads to other excesses, and all excess destroys the beauty and symmetry of the soul's purposes. According to the teachings of occultism, the virtues have their origin in the understanding of the student himself. As a disciple becomes grounded in philosophy, he gradually becomes incapable of doing unphilosophic things. No one masters an evil habit until the habit itself falls away, because it is no longer consistent with the standard of living and thinking. The virtues arise not from a desperate effort to inhibit the evil tendencies of the nature, but rather from an unfolding inward beauty which, asserting itself, comes finally to dominate each action and render it likewise beautiful. Philosophy, by leading the mind away from excess and establishing it firmly in moderate courses of thought and action, elevates the entire life, bestowing new inspiration and meaning upon each impulse and attitude. When the golden mean is established in men, the golden age will be established in the world. 6. Detachment. Every man is ruled by that over which he exercises the sense of possession. Detachment is not only the mastery of the impulse to possess, it is the ability to disassociate values. True value must always be sought for its own sake, and not with the hope of material reward. Unfortunately, many students taking up the study of philosophy and the occult sciences are motivated by selfishness. The poor want to be rich, the sick want to be well, the humble want to be powerful, and nearly all desire that their efforts should be rewarded in measurable, temporal terms. A great number turn to philosophy for consolation. Some, in extremity, grasp at wisdom, as drowning men are said to grasp at straws. Religion is not a metaphysical breadline. All philosophers of merit and enlightenment have agreed that it is a sacrilege to exploit the sacred teachings to accomplish those material ends which are entirely outside of the province of religion. By detachment in philosophy, we mean that every disciple worthy to receive instruction must come to the temple offering all that he has and all that he is for wisdom, expecting no other reward for his effort than wisdom. The philosopher desires wisdom above all the treasures of the earth, because wisdom is necessary to the health of the soul and the perfection of the inner life, and this health and this perfection are necessary to the plan of human evolution. This wisdom and this perfection fulfill the destiny for which man was created. Man should no more be rewarded for trying to become wise than a child should be rewarded for growing up. The wider sphere of consciousness, the greater area of usefulness, the fuller measure of realization, these are the rewards of wisdom. They are not bestowed upon a man because he is wise, but the attainment of wisdom itself naturally produces these improvements in the consciousness. Strength is not given to a man as reward for growing or as reward for exercising. The means themselves produce the ends out of their own processes. There is a story frequently told of a Hindu chela who asked his master what a man had to do in order to become wise. The master took him into the Ganges and held the disciple's head under water for several seconds. "What did you think while I was holding your head down?" asked the teacher. "Only one thing," replied the chela. "I wanted air." "How badly did you want air?" "More than anything else in the world." "Did you think of wealth, or rewards, or ambitions?" "No, master, only air." "Very well, my son. When you want wisdom as you just wanted air, then you will become wise. 7. Relaxation. The achievement of philosophy is the most serious work in the world, but no one can afford to take it too seriously. One of the old poets has referred to the laughter of the gods on high Olympus, and I cannot but think sometimes that these gods are laughing a little at men who have forgotten how to laugh. All the great philosophers whose words and thoughts have survived the changes of time have possessed a sense of humor. It is observable that most students of metaphysics take themselves and their efforts too seriously for their own good and the comfort of others. Instead of mysticism bringing them a deep and abiding joy and peace, it bows them down with the weight of cosmos. It is perfectly possible to assume the moral responsibility for action and at the same time retain a native optimism and a sense of humor. It is always good for the young student to remember that, while the world and other people appear to be going to the dogs, this universe and all that it contains is really going to heaven as rapidly as it can. No one is failing. There are no lost souls. Although many seem to desire to grow by a difficult and unpleasant process, everyone is growing. Each individual is doing the best that he can for what he is and where he is, and as he becomes more, he will do better. Each individual should carry as heavy a burden as he can carry joyously, but when his morale begins to bend under the weight of his load, he is no longer contributing to the common good. The financial depression of 1929 proved to thousands that happiness did not arise from possession, but from values within the soul itself. This is an important lesson, worth all the sorrow that it has cost. In metaphysics, relaxation means even more than this detachment from strain and stress. It means the ability to rest the mind from the heavy processes of thinking by periodic detachment and repositing of the thinking process. Every human being, in order to be truly wise, must learn to play as well as work. It is very hard for serious-minded people to enjoy occupations of trivial importance, but the human brain is so constructed that it cannot stand constant strain for a protracted time. There must be either a letdown or a breakdown. The arts offer recreation to those whose minds are immersed in the sciences, and the sciences in turn are necessary to those whose lives are given to the arts. Each life must have its vocation and its avocation, and they should be sufficiently different that they bring completely different faculties into operation. An interesting book could profitably be written about the recreations of the great. I cannot too strongly recommend relaxation to metaphysical students. Nearly all of those whom I have contacted in many years of public work have forgotten that philosophy is not only the science of living, but also the joy of living. We should all remember that if we do not live well in this world, and appreciate the beauties of our present sphere, we shall scarcely merit a better world, or a happier sphere. At first, these 7 essential qualities may seem somewhat contradictory, but it must be remembered that it is the duty of the intelligent student to blend and balance what would otherwise be extreme courses of action. The blending of these 7 qualities is the fine art of philosophy. He who completely accomplishes this blending is master of himself. Self-mastery leads to those higher ends of understanding, to which all disciples aspire. The 7 requisites of the inner life, termed character, have already been outlined, so we shall now examine the 7 requisites of the outer life, which we shall call attainments. It is often difficult for students to realize that the perfection of self is the real work of each individual. The building of character, the unfolding of consciousness, the development of understanding, all these are processes which operate only under the direction of consecrated and enlightened will. Perfection is not a gift from the gods. Each person must work out his own salvation with diligence. It was during these morbid centuries that we now call the Dark Ages that beauty and joy were excluded from the religious life. The doctrine that the material universe is a place of evil from which we should attempt a precipitous exit belongs to the same period of religious psychology. It is true, philosophically, that the material universe is impermanent, and that it is wrong for the human soul to invest its hope of glory in material things. The wise of every generation have recognized the impermanence and insufficiency of temporal achievement. Yet this has not caused them to overlook the important lessons which physical life has to teach. The most imminent of man's spiritual duties is the mastery of the physical environment, wherein he has been placed by the lords of karma. To evade the physical issues of life is to evade moral responsibility. The old teachings are very definite on this point. The ancient mystery schools permitted none to receive the esoteric tradition who had not perfected, to at least a reasonable degree, the conduct of the outer life. No reputable metaphysical system has ever encouraged individuals to pray, meditate, concentrate, visualize, or affirm themselves out of those duties and obligations which form the motivating principle in material existence. This does not mean that metaphysical exercises do not have a place in the spiritual plan of life, but they are never to be regarded as substitutes for right action and intelligent thinking. It is quite evident that the initiates of the ancient world would not have demanded a high standard of excellence and ability from their disciples, had not this standard been necessary to the understanding and application of the wisdom teachings. It is therefore wise for every truth-seeker to perfect himself in all useful lines of knowledge. We shall call the 7 branches of essential knowledge attainments, because they are accomplished out of the effort and integrity of the individual. The purpose of all knowledge is the perfection of the soul being that part of man which transmutes experience into spiritual power. The experiences of the outer life feed the soul, even as the impulses of the inner life nourish and sustain the objective personality. Olympiodorus, in his Banquet, describes the feast of the soul, explaining that man very often feeds the body well, but permits the soul to starve. When the soul is starved, it dies, or at least loses its power to influence the mind and heart. Now, the food men eat does not retain its individuality, but passes through certain chemical changes, so that only a certain energy resident in it is finally assimilated into the human system. In the same way, knowledge which man acquires does not retain its individuality in every case, but passing through an assimilative process in the consciousness, is transmuted into an energy which nourishes and perpetuates the soul. Thus, when men study music, art, literature, philosophy, or even the crafts, it does not mean that the soul receives into itself a heterogeneous mess of ill-digested experiences, or that the soul merely becomes the image of the art or science that it has attained. A divine alchemy transmutes all experience and knowledge into a hermetic medicine, the fabled panacea of the alchemists, that medicine which alone can cure ignorance, the disease of the uninformed. It is not reasonable to expect each man to be the master of all 7 of the ancient sciences. In fact, at this stage of evolution, it is a life work to achieve a reasonable degree of efficiency in 1 or 2 branches. Life is short, and art is long, but the law of reincarnation assures us that centuries of opportunity for accomplishment extend before us, and that each life, if intelligently lived, contributes its part to the greater perfection that lies ahead of us. Through the 7 requisites of the inner life, character, we become capable of estimating deity as quality. Through the 7 requisites of the outer life, attainments, we gain the capacity to appreciate divinity as wisdom and activity. Of course, at the present time in our educational system, the metaphysical implications in the arts and sciences are denied or ignored, but this in no way detracts from the fact that these spiritual values exist. The arts and sciences, like most of the theologies of man, have been reduced to elements of an economic program, their aesthetic factors sacrificed to the selfish institutions of man. Yet behind each art and science is a universal law, and those who would discover the divine agent should not ignore the God who lives in his own works. The 7 requisites, which constitute the ancient outline of knowledge, the links of Homer's golden chain, are as follows. 1. Mathematics. Under this heading are included the several departments of arithmetic, algebra, geometry, trigonometry, etc. Mathematics was cultivated by the earliest of civilized peoples. An exact knowledge of it is evidenced by architectural remains dating back to prehistoric times. Arithmetic is the science of exactness, and bears witness to the consistency and immutability of law. The philosophical geometry of the Egyptians was the basis of Pythagorean philosophy. Plato was learned in the wisdom of Pythagoras, and derived from this earlier teacher his celebrated axiom, God geometrizes. It is evident to the scientist that mathematics is not a man-made science, but a discovery by man of a science that exists in the universe. A human being may possess a conscious knowledge of mathematical principles, yet he shares this knowledge with the most minute of creatures. The cell of the bee, the shell of the radiolarian, and the geometrical form of the snowflake all bear witness to the universal arithmetic, a cosmic geometry. Among mortals, Mathematics is one of the driest of sciences, but this is because an ignorant generation has divorced calculation from the drama of life. Most of the beauty that we see about us in nature is due to some aspect of cosmic arithmetic. We live in the midst of universal equations. Strangely enough, the study of mathematics is closely related with the simulation of intuition. Certainly no person who has read the commentaries of Proclus on Euclid can fail to appreciate the sublimities of the numeral theory. Thousands of students seeking God in numerous metaphysical ways, by failing to master mathematics, have lost the opportunity of perceiving divinity manifesting itself through the glorious geometry of form. 2. Astronomy. In ancient times, what we term astronomy was embraced within the all-inclusive subject of astrology. No classical philosopher could have been interested in the arrangement of the sidereal bodies without desiring to understand the effect which these bodies produces upon man. Astrology is moral astronomy, and astronomy is astrology divorced from all practical purposes. What use is it to know the number of the stars or to discover the elements of which they are composed, to measure their orbits and calculate the intensity of their light, if in the end we deny that any of these factors are in any way applicable to human existence? The first astronomers, from their high towers, established systems of time from the sidereal motions. From these have resulted calendars, most of which were originally devised for horoscopal purposes. Under the heading of astronomy are to be included the whole anatomy of the universe, the theories of history, the mysteries of climate and weather, the mutations of season, all of which bring us naturally to agriculture and husbandry. In other words, astronomy was the orderer of life, one of the most civilizing of the sciences. To the mystic, astronomy is the key to magnitude values. Astronomy enlarges the universe, revealing a world too large for smallness, too glorious for meanness, too beautiful for hate, too honest for deceit. Astronomy reveals man's place in the plan. It shows him to be a part of an infinity of incalculable life, and reveals the whole sidereal diffusion bound together by an all-ensouling wholeness. Man's kinship with the stars and the grain of sand is established. 3. Biology and physics. These branches of learning gradually emerged from the alchemical researches of the ancient Chinese, Brahmins, and Egyptians. The first practical laboratory was that part of the temple, set aside for research in chemistry and medicine. The various branches of research in the chemical factors of life were not originally divided into numerous departments as now. Priests were the first scientists, the first physicians, and the first students of anatomy and physiology. We have listed these several sciences under one heading because they all directly or indirectly relate to structure and function. From these scientists, certain laws of nature become immediately evident. Man's exploration of nature and its processes gave rise to the theory of what we now call science. In olden times, these researches were not carried on by scoffing materialists, but by enlightened philosophers who discovered, beneath the superficial aspects of form, divine chemical and mechanical processes. Science is, therefore, the study of the anatomy of the body of God. The laboratory reveals not only the infinite mystery of life, but also the infinite complexity of function. Man's veneration for the universal wisdom that supports this supreme order, sustaining all things in their proper relationships to all other things, grew with the increase of knowledge. Knowledge brings with it appreciation, and appreciation is one of the most beautiful forms of religion. Man is never far from a truth which he has learned to appreciate. 4. Social and political science. This department of learning arose from man's contemplation of the motions and courses which are apparent in those social aggregates which we call nations and races. Included under the heading of social science was the vast body of tradition and research which has given rise to the laws governing relationships of individuals. The social sciences gave rise to the doctrines of morality and the various codes of convenience and compromise necessary to the survival of individuals under a social order. Therefore, we may consider with Cicero that civilization arises from the speculations of ancient wise men directed toward the improvement of community existence. Under the political sciences must be included government, leadership, and all regulation of community affairs by which the general motion and trend of empire is preserved toward those consistent ends for which empire was devised. Political science in the Western world had its origin with Solon, and received the refining influence of Plato and Aristotle. Statesmanship and political organization reached their heights under the Romans, with whom they also deteriorated into tyranny. Most modern governments are revivals of ancient policies, and the failure of theory of government in the modern world is largely due to the increasing interval between natural law and political purpose. The statesmanship of old were philosophers, deriving their inspirations for government from astronomy, mathematics, and physics. When political science divorced religion and philosophy, it lost the name of action. Governments since that time have never survived their own inherent weaknesses. To the mystic, the study of social and political science reveals both the strengths and weaknesses of existing institutions, and prevents the earnest thinker from falling under the influence of traditional evils that have remained uncorrected since the decay of the religio-political institutions of antiquity. 5. Music and art. Under this heading are included the numerous aesthetic and cultural impulses which exist eternally in nature and have given rise to artistic institutions among men. Included with music and art are, of course, poetry, drama, and dance. The aesthetic arts were all of religious origin, their development paralleling the unfolding of beauty in the human soul. To perfect oneself in an art is to feel a small part of that creative impulse by which the whole universe was brought out of chaos. Beauty has always adorned truth. First, because truth, moving through nature, is eternally producing beautiful effects. Second, because men, propagating the universal good, were inspired to perform their rites and rituals through beautiful institutions symbolic of a divine beneficence. With the decline of classical civilization, man turned gradually from a religion of beauty to creeds of severity and melancholy. Several great nations completely destroyed their aesthetic impulses by the experience of Puritanism, which established vicious precedents that have impoverished national culture. In England, for example, Puritanism practically destroyed music. The purity of religious arts has been perverted among nearly all modern peoples. From the aesthetic arts, men learn to live beautifully, and when these arts are explored to their divine origin, they inspire the human mind to nobler standards of action and relationship, bringing dignity and purpose to all the finest of human relationships. The arts feed the soul, and soul starvation is responsible for much of the degeneracy and decadence which has perverted the aesthetics of the present generation. The loss of art results in the loss of soul, and the loss of soul, in the end, brings about the fall of empire. 6. Language. Under the heading of language are included grammar and rhetoric, literature, and the whole theory of communication of ideas. The most ancient languages of the earth were mere sounds derived from nature by man seeking to express such primitive emotions as hope, despair, love, hate, and fear. The history of language is a record of the gradual objectification of the subjective impulses of the human mind. Oral language gave rise gradually to hieroglyphics and written characters. Alphabets are conventionalized pictures devised by the progenitors of present races. Language is the science of expression. He who expresses well shares himself with others. With our eyes we may all perceive together some outer phenomenon of nature, but with our ears we may listen to the thoughts of other men. We can hear their hopes, their dreams, and their aspirations, and we can share with them the fruits of our own experiences. The significance of language depends largely upon the meanings of words. Many of the greatest evils that have afflicted man have arisen from the misinterpretation of terms. This is particularly true in religion, where numerous conflicting creeds have risen up to interpret in various ways the simple words of a single sentence. It is the purpose of words to communicate knowledge, thus increasing man's common share of truth and enriching the life of each by the experience of others. Beautiful language has a ministry to perform, and those who desire to serve truth and become part of the philosopher's hierarchy should equip themselves with the power of right expression. To study language is to find the universe in sounds, and the laws of life in the combinations of small symbolic figures called letters. The whole unity and diversity of existence is revealed in the mystery of alphabets. The evolution of language is as glorious a pageantry as the evolution of life. 7. Philosophy. The seventh place we have allotted to philosophy itself. Under this general heading, we include all man's groping for knowledge by the laws of mind. The word philosophy was first used by Pythagoras to designate the science of the love of wisdom. Man, living in the midst of an infinite existence, reaches out from himself by intellectual extensions and seeks to grasp the whole of infinity within the narrow confines of his own intellect, hence philosophy. The mind being incapable of receiving and interpreting the infinities of the knowable, men of wisdom realize the necessity of exercising and developing the intellect itself, so that its capacity to know and to retain knowledge might be increased. Philosophy is more than merely thinking and arguing. It is the science of building up the capacity to know. Most people do not realize the limitations of their own thinking equipment. They do not appreciate the years of preparation which must precede the capacity to understand. This preparation the old masters called discipline. By discipline, they develop the numerous faculties of the thinking equipment until at last they gain the power to think God. By accomplishing this, they liberated themselves forever from the superstitions of those who could not think God. Superstition brings truth down to the level of ignorance, clothing it in innumerable falsehoods. Philosophy elevates man to the level of truth, creating within him the capacity to sense and to realize, to visualize and to comprehend. For this reason, philosophers are called the noblest race of men, for they alone perceive correctly the adequate reasons for the virtues of the race. To think is to wonder is to discover is to know, and to know is to be a philosopher.